right, so let's talk a little bit about feedback in learning situations, the knowledge of results that a person needs. There are three purposes to giving feedback. One is to provide information so that the learner can adjust their behavior. Two is having feedback increases our motivation to learn. We want to get the feedback that we did it right. We want to get that feedback. So it makes people want to learn so that they will get, yay, good job, you did it right. It leads to goal setting for improving performance. So when we have feedback, we can say, okay, well, what my goal is to be able to get, better than that, so I don't get that feedback in the future, or I want to exceed that goal, or I want to do right. So we can set goals if we know where we stand right now. A lot of times we have mistaken assumptions about our abilities, and so feedback after training gives us some concrete information so that we can change our goals. So there are certain principles for how to deliver good feedback. First off, immediately following the behavior. So if you're in a training session and a person's trying some kind of psychomotor task where they're manipulating something, and you can see that they're holding it wrong or something like that, give that feedback as soon as you possibly can, so that you don't let them fumble around and then we all go sit back in our seats and now we tell you, you were holding it wrong. They need to see it at the moment that they were holding it wrong. They need to hear. I was just reading a case about counseling students who were in training, and they were watching videos of counselors at work, doing a session, and then they were supposed to rate that counselor. That kind of training where you get to see somebody else doing something and you get to see what the instructor says that counselor should or shouldn't have said, and like that kind of feedback immediately as you see the behavior happening is really important, because that allows the learner to tie the specific instance to the specific feedback. Generalized feedback like, well, throughout that you were kind of slow. Like, that's not very helpful. Like, exactly where was I slow? I wasn't slow the whole time. So what exactly are you talking about? I need specificity in order for me to know exactly what to change. Feedback needs to be frequent. So having lots of little quizzes, or having lots of peer-to-peer interactions, or lots of times where the learners are all doing something, the instructor walks around and comments on it or whatever. Needs to be frequent. Lots of different styles too, right? I just gave you 3 different ways that we could have feedback occurring. We need to have positive feedback. Great job. I really liked it how you did X. And we also need the negative parts to be in there. Okay, but in the future, when you do it, I need you to do it like this or whatever. You need to include those. Now, phrasing is important on that, right? You don't go, loser, you did it. Going back to last chapter where the boss says, you suck. Like, that is not what I mean by negative feedback. I mean, it needs to be, yes, I want to buoy your spirits, but I also need to correct errors. And so the feedback needs to include both of those. Some people argue for the book ending, where you say something nice, you say what you need to say, and then you say something nice, so that people argue that would be less harmful or hurtful. I'm not sure. You still heard the thing in the middle, so I'm not sure book ending it really is as important as just you can't sugarcoat or be afraid to give both kinds of feedback. Because you do need to deliver it sensitively, but you do need to deliver it clearly. A lot of times people will use sort of what we call passive language in APA style. We call it passive language, where we say things like, it should have been done like this, or it needs to be done like that. Or we maybe even give something even more passive, where we say, it seems like you could do it like this. That's not a clear message. If it needs to be done a certain way, the message, the feedback needs to indicate it needs to be like this, right? You can't have these sort of soft, maybe I'm not going to hurt your feelings if I say it this way, but actually now what you've done is introduced ambiguity. So it needs to be sensitive, but it also needs to be clear. All right. Now, transfer of training is a very old-fashioned concept where we are very interested in whether the things that the person learns in their training session come back to the workplace and actually affect the way that the person is engaging in the workplace. So there we go. So the extent to which the materials, skills, or procedures learned in training are taken back to the job and used regularly by the employee. I would argue that this is one measure of how effective the training really was, whether you see people actually using these skills in the workplace, changing their behavior. So positive transfer would be those circumstances where the training that the person has undergone actually improves their performance once they return to, comes back and actually improves their performance in the workplace. That's positive transfer. So the training has a positive effect. Negative transfer is after the training, the person comes back to the workplace and is actually doing worse than they were before they got trained. And I mean, that sounds outlandish, but sometimes in training, we have actually taught people principles or attitudes that can lead to negative performance after the training. And we do not want that. So how to ensure positive transfer of training? This came from a meta-analysis that was conducted in 2010. Identical elements theory says that we should maximize the similarity between the training situation and the job situation in order to maximize positive transfer. The more realistic the training situation is to the job situation, the more readily the learner will say, oh, this is very much like exactly what I'm going to do when I get back to my workplace. Active practice is another way to boost positive transfer. Have the person actively engaging in the trained elements with a partner or with their supervisor, or sometimes they'll even have you sort of videotape yourself and then the instructor gives information about what they saw in the video. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you could do for active practice, but it seems to be really important for positive transfer. Having different contexts for practice, especially if the workplace is varied. Maybe your training place, whatever the location is not very similar to the workplace. So maybe we go out and we practice in different locations so that you start to break the association in your mind between the training location and the training content. You start to realize that this content gets applied in lots of contexts, and hopefully that means you'll also conclude it gets applied in my workplace. So if you can't do it in the workplace, just at least make sure that it's lots of different contexts. They've found, with rats, with all sorts of learning scenarios, that when you practice in different situations, it causes you to generalize to all situations more readily than if you only practice it in one situation. Transfer climate is the support that your peers have for you coming back and displaying new behaviors on the job, that your supervisor has for you coming back and displaying new behaviors on the job. So it's really sort of an issue of, and maybe you've been in these situations where, there's some resentment maybe about the training that you've taken, or the kinds of people who had to go get the training, or other kinds of things. And so now you come back and you're like, well, this is what they taught me in training. And the other people around you are saying, but that's not how we do it here. Like, don't be doing that while I'm here, because that's not how we do it here. I'm thinking in my mind right now about my beloved is a volunteer firefighter. And some of the volunteer firefighters have been here so long that they never went through the modern training that he had to go through when he joined just 5 years ago. And so some of the older folks who have been there longer kind of resent when he's been to training. He's a new guy, he's been to training, and then he's doing things, we'll say, wrong in the minds of the people who have been here a long time and haven't been through the training. So they sort of don't support, and they're his officers in his volunteer, group, and they're saying, well, that's not how you do it. And he's like, well, that's how they taught me to do it. I'm pretty sure that's how the district wants it done, but the old timers don't want it done like that. That kind of thing you run up against sometimes. And so if you have a negative attitude back in your workplace, you're much less likely to display positive transfer. Ongoing collaboration among trainers, trainees, and managers. if there's a sense that the training is relevant because the trainers, the trainees, the managers all have these sort of like interactions, and there's a constant sort of reassessment of what training is needed, and what should we develop next, and it feels collaborative, it's much more likely that there will be a positive transfer of training if it feels like everybody's invested in it. If everybody has clear expectations before the training starts, if it's really clear that we expect you to go to training and we expect you to come back and display evidence of what you got trained, right? Like we expect you to do that. That makes it a lot more likely that the person will come back and display that positive transfer. And then if there's like little bites of reminders while you're on the job of the training that you had, that will help you to maintain the positive transfer. So I'm thinking right now about a training that I recently took on cybersecurity. It was a really well-defined, really well-developed program for a couple of different reasons. One was it was little tiny bites. So one concept would be taught in one session. And so these sessions were 5 minutes to, I think the maximum I spent on any of them was like 12 minutes. And, there'd be like a little video that you watched. You had to answer a couple of questions about it. And little tiny bites, so much more likely that we could remember the details of it. Frequent. I think we had a new thing coming in like every 2 weeks or something like that. So very frequently we get a little bite. Then there would be like a little, I don't want to say reminder, but like a little compilation thing that you did at, every 6th week or something. There was one that sort of reviewed everything that you'd covered till that point, stuff like that. So it kind of did the repetition thing. And of course it was a cybersecurity thing and we took it online. So it had that sort of like on the job quality because you're on your computer and it's all seeming really super relevant. And then once we were completely done with it, there would be like these little emails that would show up with a little short video reminding you of something from it. I thought that was really clever. I don't know who came up with this training, but I thought it was a really good training. Now, having said that I thought it was a really good training, I am not kidding you when I tell you that we all finished the training, I think like June. And by August, the employer had the most enormous hack that employer had ever had because someone clicked on something in an email. So it was like directly related to this really awesome training we had all taken. And nevertheless, all I can say is maybe it was a new hire who hadn't had the training yet. That's all I can hope. Because I'm sorry, it was a really good training. They even gave us on-the-job maintenance. And then we had this giant breach after that. Oh, that was awful. One of the most important factors in this whole thing is that transfer climate. If you believe that your peers aren't going to respect you coming back and displaying these behaviors or whatever, you're not going to display good positive transfer. Other factors that are not as clear but go along with positive transfer, people who are higher in conscientiousness are going to be more likely to feel obligated to display the behaviors that they were trained to do. People with higher levels of cognitive ability are more likely to recognize the value of this training and apply it in the appropriate way. And then also a sense of, I took this because I wanted to. Volunteer participation is one of those factors that makes people feel more invested. So even if they don't really have a volunteer situation, like let's say, for example, one way that you could boost the sense of voluntary participation by saying, here's a list of things that you can complete this year, but you have to complete one of these. The fact that you made it voluntary will make that person remember the one that they chose a lot better than if you forced them to take that exact same one. If you said you have no choice, go, and you have no choice in the timing, and just go do it. So feeling like you have some control helps to make it more likely that you feel like you picked it, you feel invested in it now, and you're more likely to want to come back to your workplace and display the skills that you were trained. So I would argue, in addition to all the things here, if you can make it seem like the person had choice, even if they don't, you get better performance from the training. All right, let's go ahead and stop here. We'll talk about how to deliver training in our next video.